Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Marty Matas. I'm the Vice President of Branding and Commercial Development here at Polyfuze, and I'll be your moderator today. The topic of today's webinar is how technology is ending theft in the reusable packaging industry. And we're going to be focusing on this because it's a very real problem. But fortunately, it's a problem that's getting a lot of attention. Some of you may already know about recent legislation that was passed with the help of the Reusable Packaging Association. And I'm talking, of course, about HR 895, the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act, or CORCA for short. But for today, however, we're going to focus on track and traceability of an asset. And in doing so, we're going to focus on two non-negotiables when it comes to this topic. Number one, that there's an asset that has a label that stays physically attached. That's going to be segment number one of the webinar. And Jason Brownell from Polyfuze is going to lead us through that. And number two, that there's a system in place for logging movement of the asset and its track and traceability. That's going to be segment number two. And for that, we're going to be joined by Dave Horvat from Realtime Intelligence. Segment number three is going to be questions from the audience. So we encourage you to please put a question in the comments section. Without further ado, let's get segment one started, and allow me to introduce Jason Brownell, who is the Director of Engineering for Polyfuze.
Marty, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Love doing this, and it's fun just being able to educate people. So yes, we're talking about thermoplastics, specifically like polyethylene, polypropylene, their different derivatives and their family. It's a major use. And today, like you said in the intro, we are going to be focusing specifically on reusable packaging. So if you look at some of the losses that are involved in the reusable packaging space, in the baking industry alone was reported 10 million plus, which is just crazy amount of losses. Focusing in on some specifics, like Trader Joe's reported over an 18-month period, 2.5 million in loss. So it is substantial. And some of the information that we're going to be talking about comes directly from an article, A Novel Means to Address RFID Tag and Item Separation in Supply Chain. And tag separation alone in fresh produce was like at 70%. And so by tag separation, not only does this include, RFID, for example, but this could also be linear barcodes or 2D data matrices, for example. And what was reported in this was over 75% of the tested labels failed after just 10 wash cycles. And it's substantial. And so help me with this, Marty, please.
Yeah, so since the first part of this webinar is focusing on the problem of label separation, I want to take a minute to share something. And I encourage everyone listening to check this out for yourself. Now, during the past decade, we've done a lot of research and we spent a lot of time trying to find long-term performance testing on labels that were applied to low surface energy materials. And I'm talking specifically about high density polyethylene and polypropylene. So as you review this document with me, I just want to make sure to add that this is just one of many documents we found. It's very commonplace in the label industry. So this particular document, as you can see from the arrow, this is saying it's a label that's a durable label suitable for use in the automotive industry. The second part of the document here that we're going to focus on talks about its specific use on low surface energy materials like HDPE and PP. And then third, it talks about its resistance to a harsh environment or chemicals. In the reusable packaging industry, that might be pressure washing or exposure to UV. But as we go deeper and we take a look at the performance test data, and you're going to see this as the next doc, we're going to focus in on two parts of this document. Let's look at the top first, Jason. On the top, we can see that the initial peel testing was done on HDPE and LDPE panels. But as we go deeper and look at long-term performance, we see no sign of the polymer panels being used, just stainless steel, glass, and aluminum. So what does this mean for you, the listener, to this webinar? Well, don't take our word for it, is what it means. Go take a look for yourself. We encourage you and challenge you to go take a look at your current label spec, especially if you're using a pressure-sensitive adhesive label, and try to find the long-term performance testing tested on polymer panels. If you can find it, please share it with us because we've yet to discover it. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. So what happens then when a label separates from his asset, um, quite frankly, you can't track what you can't identify, right? So that's a challenge right there. And HDPE, polypropylene, super popular materials that are used in the reusable packaging industry. And so what happens then if the tag and the asset get separated, right? The label and the asset get separated, chain of custody breaks down. So that's number one. Um, a lot of people don't even think about the cost that is associated with trying to locate a particular asset. And then if you do find that asset, what is the cost then to relabel that asset? That adds up as well. And this is all part of the whole problem. But what if it's completely lost, or maybe it is stolen, for example, and it just goes untraced? What's the cost associated there? And so that's where we come into play and give the reusable packaging industry a solution when it comes to like linear barcodes, 2D data matrix, QR codes, identification, who the asset belongs to. And we're not adhesive based. Our labels literally are plastic, and we are putting it together with the plastic part, and then we are heating the label to its melt temperature. We're heating up the skin of the plastic asset to its melt temperature, and the two melt together to become one. So think of this more as plastic welding than it is any sort of other decorating technology. We're taking two like materials and melting them together. So that's why it works, and that's why a lot of people choose to go our direction, is because they're looking for something that can be there for the life of that asset. This is just one example where they wanted to be able to identify their palette, and they chose to go our direction because they wanted to be able to have it there for the life of the plastic. So again, that's just one example. And you have a special guest, Marty. Yeah.
We do, Jason. And as this webinar is talking about reducing theft and loss, we talked about the importance of having a permanent label. I can think of no one better on the second segment when we're now talking about scanning select movement of an asset. Dave Horvat is the CEO of Realtime Intelligence. I sit on the board of directors with Dave for the Reusable Packaging Association. He's a wealth of knowledge, and he's going to be joining us right now. Let's go and bring Dave on.
Awesome. Hello, Dave.
Hello, Dave.
Hey, guys. Great to see you, Jason and Marty.
Welcome.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and just kind of who you are?
Sure. Well, I'm a technology guy that has gotten to learn an awful lot about reusable packaging over the last 15 years, primarily leveraging sensor-based technologies to maintain visibility of these assets, and had some pretty amazing scenarios. I'm going to share some with you all today. I think you're going to tee us up with a video I shared with you guys recently. So let me give you a back set this just real quick before you hit play. My family and I were on vacation a couple months ago to the small island of Madeira, which is off the coast of Portugal. It's a Portuguese island southwest of Portugal, out in the middle of the ocean there. And we happened to stop at just a local market. And I happened to go ahead and run the video, and I think you might even have the audio that goes along with it. Yeah, so we don't have the audio. So I'll share with you what the audio was. So these happen to be plastic assets owned by a number of my customers. And I'm walking around this small island in the middle of the ocean, and you can see it's just a little fair. And everybody is merchandising their products, flowers, produce, candles. There's all kinds of stuff in this facility here, just with stolen plastic. These assets do not belong to these people. And if they can these assets can make it here. I mean, every piece of plastic you see here is a stolen asset in my customer supply chains. And the place is just filled with it. And if they can make it here, and this little tiny island, imagine all the different places that stolen plastic is winding up. It's either being stolen and used in other people's supply chains. It's being stolen and taken to regrind as the price of oil goes up. The theft seems to go in a direct correlation to the price of oil. And so we've built an entire solution set around trying to maintain visibility of high volumes of plastic like this with a visibility platform, leveraging different sensor-based technologies like RFID and Bluetooth and a few others that help our customers control this.
Hey, Dave, as you're zeroing in, can you say who are the assets? You're trying to zoom in, but can you help our audience by explaining who those assets belong to? Or is that confidential?
It's if you know anything about plastic industry, you know that what you just saw primarily from two companies, IFCO, which is the largest RPC pooler in the world, and CHEP. Those two companies had a majority of the plastic there, but there was also some one-offs. There was some baking trays I saw in there, and some beverage plastic in there that I saw as I walked around. So I saw lots, but the primary two were CHEP and IFCO, which together have hundreds of millions of plastic moving around the globe on any given day.
Gotcha. Marty, you still there?
I am.
Okay. Did you have additional questions for Dave? Right?
Yeah. Dave, maybe we can, I was talking to you yesterday and you told me about an experience that you had last week. I recall that you woke up at like 3 a.m. just so you could travel. I mean, here's the CEO of a company getting up to go travel with a driver. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I did. So I like to get dirty when I need to, and I decided to experience the life of a baking tray. So I was with we're doing some work with the American Baking Association, and we're being supported by a bakery in Chicago, and we're trying to cut into. I saw Jason had it on his slide earlier. You had the baking industry, which happens to be one of the hardest hit verticals with plastic loss, and we're attacking it aggressively. On any given year, a typical baker will lose 25 to 30% of their assets, and for someone like Flowers or Grupo or some of these larger entities, which are a lot of them, that can be tens of millions of dollars because they have millions of assets moving around. So I decided to experience the life of a baking tray. So I got on a delivery truck at 3 o'clock in the morning to see where do these things go. And I saw that, I mean, the main reason why is all the different places, they have a very open network. They have stuff going everywhere. And the hope is that they can recover this stuff. And a lot of the places, if you think about where bread goes, it goes to a gas station. It goes to a small mom and pop restaurant. It goes a lot of different places. And a lot of these places don't have storage room inside the facility to store plastic. So where does it go? Outside. And hopefully it's still there when you come back in 3 days to do your next delivery to pick up the empties. But as I mentioned earlier, there's organized crime. You talked about the crime bills that are coming into focus, and there's organized crime that's stealing all this plastic. And even if it's not being stolen, I have documented evidence where there's a stack of trays that mostly looks like my trays, but it's commingled with 3 or 4 other trays, and I got a busy schedule to hit. I'm not sifting and sorting out. I'm taking the whole stack. Well, that's also happening with my stuff and other people's stacks. So it's innocently being stolen because of convenience. It's purposely being stolen to service other people's supply chains. There's a whole bunch of reasons that I saw. I also saw that the places it goes were places I never expected. It goes to nursing homes. It goes to cafeterias and corporations who have subsidized lunch programs. It's going to fast food restaurants. It's going everywhere. And it's such an open network. It's very, very difficult to collect it all back. And what we focused on was helping people identify where the biggest leaks are, where's the money falling out of their supply chain. Because what I typically see is that the Pareto rule is in effect where 80% of your loss is in 20% of your supply chain. But when you have a big open network like this, how do you find the 20%? So that you can actually focus your resources, your limited resources, on how to get the biggest return. Maybe I'm doing some reverse logistics strategies on just these segments. If I can tell you which routes, which customers are have the biggest drain, or which ones are the slowest, because cycle days have an impact on this as well. There are so many different metrics that you can tease out of data once you start collecting data by serializing your assets.
Dave, can you give some specific examples? Because we've talked about this, you and I, in a number of occasions. And I know you've given some examples where we talked about malicious activity, organized crime, but there was a story you told recently about, it wasn't even that, it was just lack of organization. And once the data was there, other people started chiming in. Can you focus in on that specific example, please?
Yeah. So and I'll give a little bit of coaching to our audience here. The one thing that I typically preach to a potential new customer is everybody comes into a serialization or a visibility initiative with usually the same two primary objectives, and that is loss or managing loss and managing cycle times. And those are obviously two of the biggest low-hanging fruit ones that you can attack. But when you put visibility in place, there's always a third, a fourth, and sometimes even a fifth metric that has extreme value to you. And I'll give you an example. What if the story that your data told you was that when I send stuff this direction, it's 3 times more likely to come back broken than all these places over here? Well, what's different now that I know where the damage is happening? Or what about if I could tie the damage to the product that was in the tray? Because it changes every cycle out. It has different product in it. Or what if I told you that you have a wash cycle in food and beverage, and if I was able to keep track of how many times I had to wash an asset, and I could build a profile, I got to wash things 3 times after this event. I get the opportunity to either change the behaviors that are causing the negative results or modify my operations or pricing structure to account for the increased costs in those areas. And these are just a couple of the opportunities. And I think you were asking most specifically, I got to tell you, we had a really interesting thing show up at one of my customers where if you're tracking loss with serialized assets, you need to define what loss is. And I have one customer that if they haven't seen an asset in 180 days, they mark it as lost. That's their outer bound that they say, okay, we're probably not getting it back. Well, if you have a loss metric like that and you have assets you're putting on a loss report, you then have to have a recovery mechanism because once in a while, assets come back. They've been sitting in a corner of a warehouse somewhere. They're in a Walmart display for 6 months and they used your assets to build an end cap or something. So there's legitimate reasons why they come back.
And that example wasn't that there had just been assets just sitting in the corner of a warehouse. And then once some of the other distribution areas had heard about that, they started phoning in and saying, hey, we have some as well.
Oh, that's a great one. I had a baking customer, when they put a visibility platform in place, they started to have their trading partners calling them, say, hey, I've got a trailer of your assets here. You want to come pick them up? There was a general manager at my customer who framed it perfectly. He framed it with people watch what we watch. And as soon as the market realizes you have a visibility program in place, they tend to become much better corporate citizens and stewards of your assets and helping you recover because they know you're going to be able to tease out of the data where your weak points are in the supply chain. So, I mean, I know we're doing a 30-minute webinar today, but I could talk for 2 hours on this stuff about all the different things I've seen over the years that come about with serialization. And if I could finish that other anecdote about that loss metric real quick, we had a circumstance where we had a whole bunch of assets get returned in one big delivery, and they were all recovered assets, an entire trailer load of recovered assets, which is kind of odd, but it happens. But the very next read point was out to the repair facility, which now that became an anomaly. That's weird. Why would I have a whole bunch of recovered assets that are now have to go out and be fixed? What we were able to investigate and find out, because the data jumped off the page at us, was that my customer's customer was utilizing their assets in their supply chain until they broke and simply said, well, let's send them back to our customer and have them fix it. So we find out lots of things whenever you have that. And if I think you had one more you wanted to ask about with regard to the data and winning. Yes. So the last thing we talked about as we were prepping for this, in the automotive sector, where you have high dollar assets, they're not typically high volume like the plastic we talked about, but they're high dollar and lower volumes, where the criticality, we're knowing where every single one is at all times. and they're usually very low cycle times. So if you're going to buy a small set of assets, you better manage them really well, and you better know your cycle times and your dwell times. So when you can set markers to say, let's say it's a 2.5 day cycle time that the assets are supposed to start coming back. But when I have several hundred identically looking assets, it's hard to tell if it's performing well or not. Well, in a serialized world, they're obviously not the same. Each and every one is different. They're unique to us. So I get to look at profiles, and if you can set a trigger that says, if the last 90 days starts performing at 2.75 days, I need an alert, because that means my assets are slowing down. And at 3, I got to really start sending alerts, because I'm almost in jeopardy of shutting down the OEM, or I'm going to send people home, which is a bad day in manufacturing. Yeah. So what we've seen over the years, and I love when someone said this to me once, the OEMs carry a very big stick to their suppliers, and they get to thump them on the head. It's your fault to figure out where your assets are, and you can't shut us down. Well, what I learned, and I heard people say, is he who has data wins arguments. And if I can walk into an OEM with a sheet of paper that says, here's exactly what it's in your facility right now that I sent to you, here's when I sent it to you, here's everything you sent back in the last 90 days, and I have all the data that tells me what is happening, usually it's a totally different meeting from that point forward. It's now, okay, we need to collaborate and cooperate on how to make them move faster, increase the velocity, or they're investing in helping them increase the pool size, because they realize that they're the culprit of the slowdown and not the supplier. So there's so many things that come about when you serialize assets and you start using sensors to keep track of the movement for you.
That's excellent. I wanted to pause just to mention, Dave, and Jason, we've got some good questions coming in. I want to remind anybody who's in our audience to please, if you have a question, enter it in the comments section, but looks like we've got some good ones coming in. Jason, this is a Polyfuze webinar course, so it's going to be impossible to not maybe lead it back to labels. Maybe some questions that are specific to that, or some of the other items I know you had for Dave as well too, to prompt discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the comment on data, because data is everything, and you can learn and educate so much with that. And like you were talking about, one question that often comes up to me is regarding compliances, because we do a lot in the things that need to be, like, say, for example, FDA approved or FDA compliant labeling. And that's another important thing to talk about with adhesive labeling. When you have adhesive that's starting to break down and you have edges that are exposed, those are areas that can harbor bacteria and things like that. So having something that is an easy to clean surface is also very important. But yeah, FDA comes up a lot as far as compliances.
Dave, one question too I had. One of the things that, and I'm looking at some of the questions coming up, but we want to talk about what types of labels are most compatible with asset tracking systems and the experience that you have with real-time intelligence.
Oh gosh. Well, without getting too far into the weeds, I will share with you, when we work with RFID, we are 98% of the time passive, if you know what that means. Passive versus active. Basically means that there's no battery on board. And again, I don't want to get into RFID 101, but so we work with passive RFID tags. We work with a lot of different label manufacturers and organizations that have different types of antennas and inlays, and not quite sure exactly where you want to take this.
Well, and I think this is, and I'm seeing it's kind of prompt from a question that come up. Jason, you might even expand on this. In our experience, we certainly get asked for RFID labels a lot, but some of the more recent examples, Jason, if you could expand on that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say probably one of the most common that I see in the reusable packaging space is code 128, barcodes, linear barcodes. They with GS1 compliance. And so we see that a lot. But I do see a rise, if you will, using QR and also 2D data matrix. I do see a rise in that. But I would say the most prevalent is GS1 compliant code 128 would probably be the. Go ahead.
I'll bolt on to that, Jason. So from a functional standpoint, I think 100%, or if not 100%, very near 100% of all of the RF enabled assets that we serialize, there are three ways to identify the asset. There's the RF chip, which then ties with the 2D or QR or whatever the code is on it. And then typically there's human readable that's also recognizable. And we use all three of those interchangeably in our solution set, because there are times when RF is not the right choice. It's fantastic when I'm loading a trailer and I need to get everything. But if I need to get understand where a singular asset has been over time, I'm using the 2D aspect of my handheld devices to read the 2D code, QR code, whatever it happens to be, that then shows me on my screen every place that an RF read has taken place over the history of that asset. So we use them all interchangeably because they have the right fits in the right time and wrong fits for the wrong time.
Excellent. Well, let me throw one more thing out there before one of the questions. And this is a scenario, and this is for you, Dave Horvat, that I've seen and heard of a couple of times in traveling and visiting with customers. I was with a customer, and maybe this sounds familiar. They had me sit with their head of operations. It's a young guy, hardworking guy. And his question was, how do I get started? I know this is important. I know I need to have a track and trace system. Where do I get started? What advice would you offer to somebody like that? I'm sure you hear that.
I absolutely do, Marty, and I've got a couple of really good answers to that. Identify an early win. Try to find a relatively closed loop that you can control your test case or your pilot. Iron out your details in that environment and take an early win. Start small. If you try to bite it all off at one time, you're going to open up to a lot of problems. So we typically start with a pilot of as small a loop as we can test to make sure we understand really all. That's why I went on that truck ride last week I mentioned earlier with the baking company, is because I wanted to see what actually happened at the lowest detail. So start small. I think what else would I would recommend as a starting point?
Yeah, resources, things like that.
The resources definitely leverage a company with some experience, because there's a lot of science that you got to learn along the way to do it well. There's other companies like RTI out there, but we've learned a lot over the years. So and the other thing is be prepared from a data standpoint. Oh, I'm sorry. There's one really big thing here too. The serialization, the visibility platform is not going to solve your problems. It provides you actionable insights,
Right.
but you've got to be prepared to put the SOPs on the other side of it. You've got to be prepared to make the behavior changes to actually realize savings. Without that, you're not going to get that. So that's the biggest thing that I encourage customers. Make sure you have a plan for once the data tells the story that you're trying to find, what are you going to do with it? So their actionable insights is all they are until you take action.
Excellent. Jason, you have anything to expand on that? I know you get asked that question as well too.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with Dave when he says there's a lot of science behind it. You know, people are coming to me all the time saying, where do I get started? How do I do this? And every company is a little different. They're all custom. They're all unique. They have, maybe a lot of assets, or maybe it is a low volume, but a high item. So like Dave was saying earlier, and so everything is a little different in every scenario, but there's a lot of commonality as well. And you need to be able to identify it. You need to be able to track it. But then, like Dave was just saying, most importantly, what do you do after you have that data? And so I think that is very, very important.
Yeah, in that scenario I mentioned, I had referred him to the Reusable Packaging Association and their website, some good data on there.
Great resource, yeah.
Great documents. But of course, real-time intelligence companies like RTI, Polyfuze can also be good resources as well too. Mm-hmm. You guys ready to move on to a couple questions? Because we do have one or two here. And it looks like there's actually some. Oh, go ahead, Dave, please.
No, I said go ahead and fire away with the questions.
Yeah, well, the first one, this is actually a good one. Jason, I think your mention of FDA and some compatibilities came up. And the question is, how else does Polyfuze labeling address food safety concerns in reusable packaging?
Yeah, again, like I was saying earlier, having a label that not only stays with the part for the life of that asset, but having something that's easy to clean is super, super important. And so I think that's one of the advantages to looking at polymer fusion labeling, because you don't have to worry about harboring those the bacteria and germs and things like that. So, and yes, compliancy often comes up, but again, having a labeling system that becomes part of the plastic versus sitting on top of the plastic is kind of a game changer in some scenarios.
And by that, you're saying, Jason, no edge for microbes to harbor in there, no edge to fold over like a sticker or something like that.
Correct.
Perfect.
I'll finish that statement with a tag laying on the floor isn't tracking anything. And there are plenty of installations that I've seen throughout my career where tags don't adhere. They're laying on the floor, so they're not doing their job.
Excellent. We're getting some really good comments coming in here, guys. Dave, this is one for you, and it looks like it's specific to RTI's product ecosystem. So in addition to software, what else do you guys offer? What's the product offering that you provide support?
So we do soup to nuts. A lot of times we help source the tags, but there's quite often the tags are already in place when we come in. But we do source the tags as well. But you'll notice behind me, the apparatus at all the dock doors is part of our deployment. So we procure and install all of the RF equipment, as well as we put all the software and management around those. So we have a device manager. I'll just give you a quick background on it. If someone were to hit one of these with a lift truck in our data center, we know within about a minute that reader has gone away. So we have a device layer that manages all the devices across the globe for us. And then we provide the UI and all the analytics, soup to nuts for a customer. So if someone comes to us with a need, we put the whole system in place.
Outstanding.
And then I do have a question for you too, Dave, on that. So say, for example, they have hardware and they have the assets and they have them already tagged, but what they really need is the data portion of it. Do you do that as well? Like, okay, I can do the whole package or I can do just a portion of it.
So the cool thing, being quite a veteran in this space, as I mentioned earlier, I've been working in this space since about 2006. So about 20 years just in the sensor-based technologies and reusable assets. We knew when we put this platform together back in 2018-19 timeframe, we made it as a device agnostic system. So I can plug in any kind of reader. I can plug in Bluetooth. I can plug in GPS. I can plug in temperature sensors, accelerometers. There is a lot of things that help define or tell the story in a supply chain. It's not just RFID, but getting as complete a picture as you can is our objective. So there are circumstances where customers have infrastructure in place, which we just then layer on top of. There are circumstances where there is additional data points that we need to capture out in the field and assemble into the data set. I always encourage people, when you put a supply chain visibility platform in place, you're trying to answer the 5 W's that we learned as kids in school: who, what, where, when, and why. Okay. With every data point, it is our goal to associate answers to as many of those 5 W's as we can to tell the complete story that you can take action on. But to simply answer your question, we can plug into stuff that's already there.
Excellent.
I don't know if you can see the comment, but there's a comment here from a friend of ours. It says, I really enjoyed Dave's comment about customer asset visibility initiatives. They watch what we watch. So true. So kind of nice to see comments coming in. There's another question here, Jason, that looks like it's specific to Polyfuze, asking if you can speak a little bit to the sustainability of Polyfuze.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to remove this big question thing we have on the screen. I think everybody gets the fact that we're in the questions section of it. So, but yeah, so the sustainability portion of it. So a lot of people are planning now when they're designing product with end of life in mind. And so because our label material becomes part of the plastic, at the end of its life, it can be ground up. It's 100% recyclable. It can be ground up and made into something new. So, which is different than a lot of other decorating scenarios that are out there. Sometimes they have to be removed in order to be recycled and ground up. So yeah, it is 100% recyclable and sustainable.
Excellent.
Yes, sir.
You know, I'll mention one quick side note that I found interesting. If you don't remove RF from plastic when you regrind it, it is actually sometimes possible that the chip survives, and you wind up being able to read in the regrind that there's an asset there, even without the antenna. I've seen that happen. A weird anomaly. I've seen that happen once before, where the chip survived the regrind.
Huh.
Outstanding. Dave, I'm going to kind of paraphrase this next one because I can tell what this person's asking is trying to convince leadership of CapEx and just investment in track and trace. Can you give an example of how that investment is going to have an ROI attached to it? Maybe you can provide an example. I'm sure that gets asked of you all the time. Someone doesn't want to spend a lot of money, but there's an ROI on the other end. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, see, this is why I opened up a little bit ago with the counsel that your loss and your cycle time may or may not be enough to get over the hurdle. And certainly you got to measure those. But that's why I emphasize that when you start collecting data and you start lifting up the rocks, there's always a third, a fourth, and a fifth metric that is measurable, that has an ROI, that gets stacked on. It becomes a stacked ROI. Each of these are, maybe it's, as I mentioned earlier, if you have a wash cycle in food and beverage, and rewash becomes a metric, damage becomes a metric. There are so many different things that become metrics that are measurable that you can reduce. So when you're building your, in fact, actually, you've already done this, but I turn people back to the RPA again. We just had a webinar a week ago that dealt with building your ROI case for technology and reusable assets, so that these are all things that you can build upon.
I don't know if you could see this comment, but there's a question here from Geraldo. Ideally, the pallet management platform should be integrated with the asset tracking system, enabling clients to perform advanced location-based analytics and gain real-time visibility into pallet movements across the supply chain. You want to speak to that, Dave? I mean, that's certainly a comment in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so integrated with the asset tracking system. So I do agree with that. They're so closely related that sometimes it's not even integration. They're one and the same. They're so tightly bound. You didn't ask this earlier, but it is quite common when we deploy that there is an integration to an ERP, where we're sharing data back and forth with Oracle or SAP, with ordering information, and we become part of those transactions, so that we're attaching what formerly was just a reusable asset with no serialization. We're actually attaching serialization to the transaction in the ERP. But this also gives you the ability to move your assets around and make sure they're properly deployed. If you've got a distributed network, it's quite often you need these statistics to rebalance your fleet. That's a very common thing, especially the migratory behaviors. I should have mentioned earlier, it's one of the byproducts that we also uncovered, is we're able to trace the migratory behavior of assets across the network, where they start to drift and aggregate in one area where I don't need them, and they're light in another area, so I can rebalance my pools. That might be one of the things that Geraldo might be, I'm sorry, I said that wrong, Gerardo was referring to there.
Excellent. I don't see questions, but before we wrapped up, I wanted to mention, obviously people can go on your website and find you, Dave. They can find us on Polyfuze, but where are you going to be? Any trade shows or major events that people could speak with you in person in the months to come?
It's funny you should ask. In 2 weeks from yesterday and today, I'll be in Nashville, Tennessee with our team at GS1. I encourage people who are exploring these topics to, if you haven't tapped into GS1, that would certainly be a place to start to gather some additional intelligence. They're a standards organization that provides just some normalcy to all this voluminous data. So we have a booth at GS1 coming up, and we're typically any given year we're at ProMat and the various material handling shows. So that's where we'll be.
Excellent. Jason, what about Polyfuze. People want to talk shop with you. Where are they going to find you later this year?
Yeah, I know later this year we're going to be at Pack Expo, and that would in the reusable packaging pavilion. So would love to field any questions that anybody
Early
may have.
October, Las Vegas. We'll be there for sure. Sounds really
Exactly.
We'll be there too.
Well, excellent. Well, Jason, do you have anything else for Dave before we start to wrap things up?
Just a huge thank you. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your wealth of knowledge for sure.
That was a fun chat. Thank you, gentlemen. I enjoyed being with you both.
Yeah, it's a great topic. I'm really glad we were able to dive down deep into it. We appreciate the questions from the audience. And Dave, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care, all.